Before we begin, you probably did see that this session is recorded. We get that question a lot. As you signed in, you should have gotten a pop-up notifying you as such. It is recorded. It will be posted to our website once edited accordingly. And with that, let's get started. Welcome everybody to this Tuesday session of Consultants Corner. I think there's a lot of new attendees to this webinar series. Consultants Corner is a program of the Community Security Initiative every first and third Tuesday of the month. Today usually we talk about the post-award requirements, and please note that's if you think the application side is a lot, the procurement side is even harder. So just think about that as you decide to go forward. Recognize you need a good team and understanding of the process, but we'll be with you along the way. And today we have a kind of interruption to regularly programming. And we're going to talk about the Securing Communities Against Hate Crimes grant that just opened. And we'll go through the RFA, the request for application. Before we do that, just real quickly for any of you who are new to the Community Security Initiative, I'm going to pass it over to Bill Hayes, our Regional Security Director from Bronx and Westchester, to just go through some of our programming for those of you that are new to us.
Good morning, everybody. My name, as Dov said, is Bill Hayes. I'm one of the Regional Security Directors. There are 7 of us. My territory is Westchester and the Bronx. We also have security directors that cover the remaining boroughs of the city, Nassau, Suffolk, Rockland, and recently we have expanded into the Hudson Valley between the Westchester County line, Westchester-Rockland line, and pushing all the way on up into the Albany area. This month marks the beginning of our 5th year, and from our original 5 hires, we've expanded to a team of 18 security professionals, and our remit has grown along with the size of our staff because we've recognized and we've adapted to the growing security needs of the community. So on the screen there, you see some of what we do. We continue to grow. On the intel side, we've established an intelligence team that runs 7 days a week, monitoring the deep and dark web for threats. Out in the field, the regional security directors respond to anti-Semitic incidents when they occur. All of us together collectively work very hard to enhance the physical security of any institution. We provide training to staff, congregants. We conduct on-site physical and cybersecurity assessments with our cybersecurity program. And I see Jeremy Paulson, our cybersecurity program director, here on the call today. And bolded there and highlighted, because it's the topic of today's presentation, we assist organizations in obtaining the federal and state grants that are out there. But that process can be pretty burdensome and complicated, and we're here to assist you get through that process as well. Many of us, a good significant portion of our team are former law enforcement, both here and abroad in Israel, and one of our important and satisfying tasks is to be able to connect local institutions with their local law enforcement, and also at a higher level, maintaining relationships with our state, federal, and local partners in cooperating with intelligence sharing and case enhancement when things happen. And we have a real-time communication system where you can get, in the event of a regional or local emergency, where we can blast out text messages and emails to your phone or to your email address when something of concern is going on in the community. So with that, that's just a really small snapshot of what we do. I'm going to hand it back over to Dov.
All right, thank you, Bill. So that was important because I believe there are a lot of new attendees, both on this webinar and to CSI programming. Again, this webinar every first and third Tuesday of the month, talking about the post-grant needs. Today, we're going to talk about the new application that opened. It'll be today between myself, Dov Horowitz, and David Pollack. I'm sure you all are familiar, the guru behind these grants for going on 20 years. So you'll be in good hands with him. But it's very important to point out, especially to those of you who are new to us, that we are the Community Security Initiative affiliated with the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York and UJA Federation. We don't speak for the state, right? These are either state or the other grant, the federal grant, which is not opened yet. They're run by state agencies. We do not speak for them. We cannot, answer official questions, but we can share our guidance and our knowledge and our experience, as well as break down the components where people often get stuck. But that's very important to recognize. Oftentimes we get the whole team gets emails and questions daily. We can give you our best guidance. The reps, the program people are always the best to refer to. So the RFA, the request for application for the New York State Securing Communities Against Hate Crimes Grant. That's what we'll be talking about today. How to apply to this grant. It's been going around for a few years now, right? And it's now administered by the state agency called the Division of Criminal Justice Services. Many of you who may be familiar with the grants out there, there's also the Federal Nonprofit Security Grant Program. That is administered by a different state agency, the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. So both state agencies, there'll be similar contracts, but there are differences. There are differences between the two programs. A. B, there are differences in both, obviously, timelines. The federal grant's not open, but there's also differences with this grant in previous cycles. It's mostly similar, mostly the same as previous, we'll call it hate crimes grants today for short, in previous years, but there are some changes, some big and some are smaller ones. Before we dive in deeper, I'm going to give you a huge secret, a huge secret. We know this stuff that we're sharing because we read the RFA. We've read this information. All right, we're going to break it down and go through it. But we advise that every single one of you download and read the full RFP. We'll post the link into the chat function. You should be familiar. That is the best source of information. Obviously, there is some gray area. And if you see that they are taking questions that we will both submit as CSI, and you can feel free to submit to DCJS, Division of Criminal Justice Services, that you can submit questions and they will post answers publicly to everybody. Seth, if you're able to.
Can I throw in another secret, Dove?
Sure, let's go.
Okay, so if you look, it covers 2023 and 2024. If you look also, it says $25 to $60 million. What are they doing? What the state has obviously decided to do is they took the money that was in the last year's budget, the 2023 budget. The governor put in an additional $35 million in the budget that, God willing, will be passed in April. And you add those two together, you get $60 million, which means 300 projects. Another big secret. Everyone who submitted an accurate, complete application for the state hate grants last year won. So they didn't even go on to score the entire application. I think they are trying to do the same thing today and make sure there's enough money for everyone to be a winner if they can follow the rules. So what Dove is saying is learn how to follow the rules.
That's a great point. Thank you, David. At the end of the day, we're hoping similarly like last year, if you got a complete and accurate application in, you'll most likely be awarded. However, there could be a huge influx this year and nothing can be guaranteed. But that was one of the secrets of the last cycle. So let's get the basic grant information in front of us, right? You're seeing an image from this year's RFA, request for application. The grants are due May 17th. So we have time compared to previous years, previous grants. However, there's a lot to do and I wouldn't sit on it. And we'll talk about that today, what those things are, especially if you're new to this and this is your first time through a grant, you should definitely get started on the process. How much can an organization get? So here's one of those small changes, but not really from previous years. This year, any organization that's eligible can get up to $200,000 per organization for physical and cybersecurity. Last year, the same grant was basically you could get up to 4 awards of $50,000, one being cyber, equaling $200,000. The state must have realized it was just made their lives harder to have multiple awards per client. So they jumped in, jumbled it all together. You can get up to $200,000 per organization. It seems this can also be split amongst multiple facilities of one organization, but again, you can't max more than $200,000. That's your ceiling. So if you split that award up amongst multiple sites, if you have multiple sites, you have a $200,000 max. This grant, the hate crimes grant, the state hate crimes grant usually has a 2-year grant period from once it's announced. I mean, once your award is shared with you, you have a 2-year period. It seems like a lot of time, but there are a lot of rules to follow it right. And that's what this webinar, Consultants Corner, is usually focused on, helping move the needle, helping keep everything going step by step so that you can complete your reimbursements, your procurement within the rules and on time. But that's another time. That's when we're back to regular programming. Today, we're ahead of it. Please also, while we do have a chat function, we will not be answering questions until the end. Most likely, your questions will be answered as we proceed. So just, please just follow through and we'll get to the questions at the end. What's allowable? We'll go through this a little bit more. But again, you can have, each organization can submit one application. Last year, it was up to 4. This year, it's 1 to 200. You don't have to apply for the whole 200, but that's what you're allowed to do. And it's for mostly physical security, hardware, cybersecurity stuff, training, and consultants, which we will get to later. Again, this is all found in the RFA. A couple of things that you're seeing here, we will reiterate as we go through what's eligible, what's not. But here's some of the language that we pulled directly from the RFA. We'll pull it out more. I know it's a heavy slide. So let's go through, and I might turn to David in a moment, but let's talk about who is eligible for this grant. Right? On a simple way, you must be an IRS tax exempt status. You must be a nonprofit. You must be at risk, right? So they have language in the RFA, must be at risk of a hate crime or attack due to ideology, beliefs, or mission as described by the applicant organization. There are many nonprofits out there that may not be at risk per the definition of this grant. So make sure that that is your type of organization. You have to be registered with the New York State AG Charities Bureau or exempt. And something that we'll talk about a little bit more in depth today, you must be pre-qualified through SFS, Statewide Financial System. This is one of those things that I said was a bigger change from previous years. If you have done this grant before, or the other federal grant, you pre-qualified with Grants Gateway. Grants Gateway is no longer. Now you pre-qualify with SFS. Similar approach, and we'll talk about this in the coming slides, but that is a requirement of this grant. You must prove that you have pre-qualified and finished all those requirements to be eligible. David, you want to take a stab at a couple of these components? Make sure we clarify it clearly.
Essentially, IRS tax exempt. 2 things. Number one, there are some nonprofits, for example, cemeteries, that are not 501c3s. Don't ask me to go into the details. We don't need them. You have to be a 501c3. That means all houses of worship, all schools, most social service organizations are eligible under 501c3. At risk we'll go into later. AG registration will go in a little bit later, and you must be pre-qualified according to SFS. And CSI has a dedicated webpage to pre-qualify. And that's something that you should either start or check your existing account immediately. Anything else, Dov? Did I cover that?
Well, I think that's good. Again, we will be posting these slides to the website like we have in previous years. We will be posting this recording once it's complete, a couple days. But yeah, those is very important. Everyone needs to recognize where their status is. But we will be spending some time today on pre-qualification because that's what everyone loves the most. Let's talk about what you can actually do with these funds. Because remember, there's several grants out there. What CSI deals with mostly is the federal nonprofit security grant program and this Securing Communities Against Hate Crimes grant program. The NSGP is not open yet. We don't think it will open until around May time, so it might overlap with this, but the requirements are often the same. You need to be pre-qualified, you need to have an assessment, and you need to apply a different application process. We'll talk about that when that grant opens. But recognize why we need to specify, because there are actually purchase differences between the two grants. There's a lot of similarities, some things you cannot do. In short, you can purchase security hardware for your facility, primarily, right? Lighting, door hardening, camera systems, access control. Those are some of the more important things. You'll get an assessment. You're required to do an assessment, and that should point out some of the things that you should do to upgrade, to enhance your security. And then you can decide what's the most important. 200,000 can go a long way, depending on what you're doing. If you're doing forced entry doors, a double door set for the front could be anywhere from 20 to 30 grand. If you have multiple front doors or doors around your building, that could eat up your whole grant. There's some other things we think that are important to think about, especially understanding the difference between the federal grant and this state grant. For example, public address systems. The federal grant administered through DCJS is very strict about what you can purchase as a PA system. So if you think a public address system and the communications is very important, right? Of course. How can you carry out your plan if you can't communicate? A PA system is very important. Maybe you should think about that in this grant, because there's much more flexibility about what you can install. Just again, that's just knowing the nuances of the grants. Or similarly, let's say, and again, there's a lot of considerations here, but if you want to do vehicular protection, bollards, that's years-long process between zoning and all the agencies that are involved in designing it correctly. This grant, we said, is what, a 2-year period. The federal grant is a 3-year period. Could that year make a difference if you're serious about your bollard installation? For example, so things to consider about when you approach this grant versus the potentially opening federal grant later in the year.
One other thing, just so people know, because we get this question all the time, this grant does not provide any money for security guard support.
Yep.
And the federal does. So that might be a consideration.
Great point as well, and we'll definitely address that shortly. There were some efforts to try to convince the state to allow for guard and personnel coverage, but alas, it was not successful. But again, the federal grant does allow for guard coverage to an extent. What else is eligible, right? We talked about physical security upgrades. You're also able to do security training. You know, there's a set amount of type of programs in every class that you want to do or training you need to do will require DCJS approval. So meaning you'll apply, let's say you're awarded the grant. Later on, as you proceed and you find your vendor for it, you'll have to get the approval per that agenda, per that curriculum, to make sure it's in line with the intentions of this grant. In addition, you can still apply for cybersecurity. And we at CSI advise that you do use a chunk of this award. Last year, there was a $50,000 specific eligibility for cybersecurity, and we think you should keep that amount similar. Cybersecurity components, networks, vulnerabilities are something that can be accessed and attacked from anywhere versus your front door. With that, I want to bring in our cybersecurity specialist, Jeremy Paulson, to just speak for a few minutes, what he's seen in the field. He's been doing cybersecurity assessments for the community under CSI at no charge, and just want to pass the torch to him for a moment.
Thank you very much, Doug. This is very new in the sense that cybersecurity has not typically been on the radar of government until very recently. Last year was the first time that New York State acknowledged it as something. $50,000 to anybody who really understands extensive networks really isn't enough. And that was the limit last year. Of course, unlike Dove, who has a wider point of view, I tend to be a little biased for cybersecurity. And so I say, use the whole thing. So in terms of what is allowed, the door is so open, it's anything. Anything from your basic network systems, your switches, your cabling, the enclosure in which you hold your physical file servers, to those of us who still use that. It also incorporates software. Software in the sense of making sure you have up-to-date operating systems, which is a really critical failure if you don't have it. It will apply to the software you otherwise use. That is to say, if you're using out-of-date Microsoft Word or other applications, you can get them updated and paid for under this program. It is awesome. You get firewalls. Now, an additional element, which is actually one of the drums I've been pounding this year, is training. 80% of all data breaches on the part of organizations have been caused by some otherwise non-malicious staff member who basically clicked on the wrong email or opened the wrong file. This is something that can only be really fought with a combination of a training cycle at least once a year and combined with phishing simulation. It's enormous. I mean, this is an open door for cybersecurity. I encourage ferociously that you pursue this. This is like the greatest gift you're going to find in this environment. Go for it.
Well,
Let me just jump in one thing. I saw one question go by. Someone wanted a list of possible cybersecurity updates. We have a better idea. CSI supplies at no charge. Jeremy, to go and review what you have and make recommendations. He gives a written report, and it's much better to have something customized than a list of possible organizations. We're going to post the link to our request for services, and Jeremy is a very valuable service.
perfectly said. Not only that, you're required to have, for any location that you want physical upgrades or for your cybersecurity upgrades, you are required to have an according assessment done. So again, Jeremy's ready, he's geared up, his team is growing, and it's one of the services CSI provides. As he said, you could apply if you know you're a big organization and your network is vulnerable and it's time for upgrades, 2024, and that's a world that the cyber world moves quickly. You could spend the whole award on your cyber upgrades. You don't have to do the other components. You can break it up to different projects. You don't have to use the whole 200. So make sure you're aware of how you want to use the funds, and definitely for any security program, whether it's because of a grant or because you want to upgrade security or cybersecurity, the starting point is always an assessment. That's how a professional can tell you where your gaps are and how to address them.
And one other point, in the cyber world has kind of moved away from buying equipment. You don't buy your equipment anymore. You basically rent it. And there's a monthly or annual cost on the equipment. You can
Yes.
put up, there's a 2-year contract period. You can put up to 2 years of contracts paying off for some of these services. You can charge up to 2 years in the grant.
There are a lot more options in terms of how you construct your network these days. Virtualization is a reality. And by that, I'm talking about don't have a file server, rent out rack space on a cloud provider, allowing for the fact that, you have to have a different kind of security setup, and you can reduce your costs substantially. Increasingly, software is not sold, it is rented, leased. And that's another factor here. And it goes all the way down the line. So you got, bring me in. Let me look at your situation. Let me see what you've got. Let me make the recommendations, and that assessment will feed right into your application.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, David. Let's continue. We do have a lot. Hopefully we'll keep it in time. And again, we're always back on first and third Tuesday of the month with Consultants Corner. That being said, what can you not purchase? We already pointed out a few of those items, but let's reiterate. If you've already done a security hardware upgrade project, whether through this grant, previous iterations of this grant, or the federal grant, you cannot use funds from this grant for that project. However, there was language in the RFA. Again, the secret sauce is reading the RFA. It does say you could expand on projects that you've already done. Maybe you did a few doors and you want to do more doors. Last year's RFA, it seemed like if you did any type of door project, you can't request doors. So it's important distinction. You cannot use these funds for facilities that are not yet built. You must be occupied when you apply for this grant. Hey, we've seen it happen. We've heard of it. The auditors, the grant personnel do visit locations. When I was with one of these agencies, we did visit a location that did not exist. You will not be reimbursed, and you will potentially, if there's other acts taken here, you could be criminally liable, and that's happened too. So let's not think this is something we could take advantage of. Let's do it the right way and really upgrade security for the community.
And let me throw in one other thing, because we've gotten a lot of questions. The occupancy use question. This applies to whoever the occupant is. The occupant is a renter, that's fine. If the occupant is an owner, that's fine, as long as the occupant is a nonprofit and fits all the other criteria that we outlined at the beginning. So it doesn't matter if you own or you rent, you're eligible for this grant as long as you're a nonprofit at risk.
Right. Again, you should read the RFA. There will always be gray areas if we don't cover it today. David mentioned some of the questions. We're not answering them right now. We'll get to them at the end, but I believe most questions will be addressed as we continue. But like we said, we don't speak for the state. We don't know all the answers, and we will also be following up with some of those unknowns that still remain. Let's just finish up here, right? Like David pointed out before, this state hate crimes grant does not allow for personnel costs, including the cost for guards. It doesn't cover for general use and maintenance expenditures. Similarly, any overtime, any costs outside of new hardware upgrades are not eligible. The assessments you do, it does not cover, but again, CSI provides both physical security assessments and cyber assessments. In addition, it's very important to recognize whether the state grant or federal grant, these are reimbursement grants. You need to lay out the funds, pay your vendor, and then even when awarded, you'll be awarded the grant. You need to then go through a procurement process, pay your vendors. Once you do that, you can submit reimbursement paperwork. There's a process, and you'll be paid back. So just be mindful as you proceed on what your capability are to lay those funds out. And there are resources to help you if that's an issue. All right, the meat of this, the next 30 minutes. How to apply. And David and I are going to kind of tag team on this. There's a couple components, but don't be afraid. If you've been through it before, you recognize there's two systems you must use to apply, plus you need to submit your assessment. The two systems, right? We talked about already, one of the requirements for this grant is to be pre-qualified. You pre-qualify through SFS, the statewide financial system. That's where, as of January 15th through 16th, the system transitioned. David will talk about this in a moment. You need to pre-qualify through SFS. Unfortunately, some of the things over the years that CSI and David himself have worked with the old administrators of pre-qualification through Grants Gateway to fix have now come back to roost, and we are applying what we've learned and trying to coach them in the right direction. Nonetheless, you need to be pre-qualified, and then you need to actually do your application, and that's in a system called GMS, Grants Management System. If you have the other grant, that's in a different system. So if you have both grants,
other grant is the federal grant.
Right. The other grant, the Federal Nonprofit Security Grant Program, that uses e-grants. The State Hate Crimes Grant uses GMS. Similar, but two different systems. And if you have both grants, you'll have to dance in both. So there are some steps to do. Don't wait until the last minute, even with the time, because you could have follow-up information you need. If you're looking to us for an assessment, I know that every one of the RSDs, our regional security directors, have a lot of requests, and it is at first come, first serve. They might not be able to get to you for a month or two. And if you wait a month or two, there'll be another bunch of organizations ahead of you, and you might not be able to get your assessment in time from us. So just be mindful, if that's something you plan to do, please get your request in sooner than later. With that, I will turn it over to David for the next few minutes to talk about pre-qualification.
Thank you, Dove. Please excuse me. I'm trying to believe that I'm at the tail end of COVID. So Dove has been helping out already. I'm going to talk about SFS. So on December 14th, many people received an email that said, oh, Grants Gateway is going to be put out of business and there's going to be a new system. And everyone who is up to date and pre-qualified as of December 15th will be put into the new system. Anyone who did not have an up-to-date pre-qualified status in Grants Gateway was out of luck and now has to start over. Let me tell you that there are people who have heeded our warnings and have started the process. They have completed it. I have seen emails that say, congratulations, you are pre-qualified in SFS. That's great. But it took them 3 or 4 exchanges with the help desk. Please understand that CSI has no magic here. We can't open up the SFS system and admit you, but we can answer some questions. So the most important thing is, if you are pre-qualified, if you were pre-qualified on December 15th, please go into SFS and check that everything is right, because I am not a believer that they got everything right. So let's hope that you find it now, not on May 17th, when the grant is due and we can't do anything about it. So go in and check. If you're starting over, here are the links to start over. You can start at, register your organization and follow the steps to get pre-qualified. The steps are essentially the same and we'll go over them. If you think that if you had an account on Grants Gateway and your pre-qualification has lapsed, try going to the help desk, and I'll give you everyone their contact information in a few moments. But you can go into them and go forward and update whatever needs to be updated. The required documents have not changed. Certificate of incorporation, doing business as, if you're doing business under another name, you have to submit that. A 501 determination letter, I'll get into that in a moment. IRS 990 form, I'll get into. Financials, CHAR 500 or 410, those don't exist anymore. I'll get into those in a second. They still require you to submit them, but they don't exist. A board of directors profile is very, very simple. Joe Smith, and he works for ABC Widgets Corporation. And he's been on our board for 4 years. That's what you need to do for board of directors profile. Senior leadership resumes, the CEO of the organization. Yeah, what is the CEO of a synagogue? That is, I think, by nature, often very unclear, but you have to put in an organization chart and bylaws. Our pre-qualification assistance page, we have some help for all of those questions. And there is a New York State pre-qualification manual for grantees, and that provides more information. Now, they want a CHAR 500 or CHAR 410. That means that you have to register or be exempt from the Attorney General, except that the Attorney General doesn't have these forms anymore. So I've called this to the attention of the SFS, and hopefully they fix it. What you have to do is to follow this link to the Charities Bureau and get a copy of the user's guide. If you think you're already registered, you go to the public registry. There's a link right there. And you just do a screenshot of your registration. And that's what you'll file in SFS. If you are exempt, again, it's pretty simple. You fill out your name and address on the webpage that I've directed to you, the name of your organization, the address, the contact information that the Attorney General can use to contact with any questions. And then there's a box that says, take me to the exemptions questions. You answer those. The big question is, you were formed primarily for religious purposes. If the answer is yes, bingo, you're exempt and you can go on from there. Financial documents. They want an IRS 501c determination letter. We've had this question come up in the chat box many times already. What happens is houses of worship are not required to file for 501c3 status. They are automatically recognized as 501c3. So you don't need a letter. The same thing for filing IRS 990, which is the annual tax form for nonprofit. Religious corporations don't have to file. You don't have to file either of those. But what you have to do is to create a letter for each of these questions on organizational letterhead and say, we are a religious corporation. We are automatically exempt, and or we are not required to file IRS 990 forms. Those are 2 letters. You upload those letters on organizational stationery. They have to be signed by someone, the president, the secretary of the organization, and go forward from there. Now, audit reviews and findings. Houses of worship may just submit the most recent internal financial report. I usually say if you're using QuickBooks, and you should be using something to keep your books, and just a P&L report from QuickBooks is just fine. And you submit it along with a letter from a member of the board that this financial report has been reviewed by the board and represents an accurately represents the financial standing of the synagogue. Dov, was I clear?
I think so. I think everyone, the main thing to pull out of here, even if you're exempt from some of these documents, you still must provide a letterhead signed official document stating as such, and you upload that to the SFS system.
Yeah, you can't leave a box. There's a box sitting in SFS that says fill me. You can't let that space remain empty. You can put this letter in that space and it works.
Exactly. So I will say this, we will post both this recording and this presentation on our website. We don't, Moshe, please take that down. We will post these slides and the recording. We don't distribute it via email. So remember, slide 21 has some of these links that you'll be able to follow.
Now, we can't say this strongly enough, especially in terms of this grant. If you're not pre-qualified on May 17th, they will not even look at the rest of your application. Either you're pre-qualified or you're not. And remember, everyone who had a complete application last year received a grant. So this is the most important thing that you can do, is to make sure you're pre-qualified, and you will be on May 17th. So that, for example, if you were pre-qualified on December 15th and your file has been transferred to SFS, except that your financials expired in February, that means that you're no longer pre-qualified. So check when the 990, if you have to file a 990, or the date that your financials extend to, that has a date. It's shown in SFS. And make sure that nothing lapses between now and May 17th. And if you have questions with SFS, if you can't get in or something's not uploading, contact the help desk. They don't necessarily answer the phone, but they do get back to people. So send them your cell phone number and even a time when you'll be available. And they do get back to someone. I found that I got an email from a synagogue yesterday, and they went back and forth 4 times with the help desk and finally got the golden email, congratulations, you are now pre-qualified. So work on that right now.
Thank you, David. Yeah, look, the reality is, SFS is not perfect. Pre-qualification isn't perfect. Get started nonetheless. Communicate with the people there. There is time if you start now. You know, the reality of these grants, there's always extra hurdles. Free money isn't free, but follow our guidance, follow the RFA, communicate with the agencies that are administering it, navigate through and can get up to $200,000, which we know is hard for every one of our organizations to be able to, foot ourselves to provide security upgrades. All right, from there, we're going to transition to the second of the 2 systems you must use, right? The first system David just spoke about for pre-qualification. Now we're going to talk about the grants management system, GMS. That's where you will both apply for this grant, and if you are awarded, where you will manage navigating this grant, submit reimbursements, provide documentation as needed. Your grant rep will help you once you're there, but this is the portal to do that. A very important thing to recognize is there is a lot of guidance for this material. And the truth is, we have a lot of slides and material to get through. If you don't get through it all today, we'll either do a follow-up session or the slides will be provided. But most importantly, you should download the GMS application manual. And it will be like you see in the bottom where it points, click here, do this, fill out this. If you look at it all together, it can be overwhelming. If you take it step by step, it can be done. How do we know? Because many, many, many people do it. So just step by step and continue forward. So some important high-level notes to recognize. And again, we'll answer some chat questions at the end. With GMS, it's a little archaic. It's just the world we're dealing with. Not only do you need to submit your application within GMS questionnaire, you need to also attach a Word document. Not only do you need to attach a Word document, they're very specific about the requirements of this Word document you submit, right? They tell you that you need to prepare the responses to questions in a Microsoft Word document using Arial 11-point font and 1.5 line spacing, right? So then what you will do is you'll take this Word document and you'll post it under the questions tab of the application. Another piece that is important to point out, I don't know if that's the case this year, but in previous years, GMS times out after 30 minutes. So if you're trying to slowly churn through GMS and you didn't do it first in a Word document, it'll time you out and it won't be saved. And that's just the reality of dealing with sometimes these agencies that need to update their software. So another reason, get through all the questions that are in the RFA and that are in GMS, put those questions on a Word document, and then you can quickly copy and paste back into your application. Oh, there, so we say it. GMS times out after 30 minutes. So another reason, again, so the questions are both provided in the RFA. We provide the link earlier in the chat box. It'll be on this slide deck. It's on our website. Hopefully you've reviewed it. The RFA seems like a lot, right? It's 40 plus pages, but it's broken down. Some of it is guidance. Some of it is reference links. It's not 40 pages you need to digest in depth. So we really advise that your next step you do is to read that RFA, and that will provide you these questions that you'll see once you do have a GMS account, and you'll have to answer it there as well. This is what we already said. Again, you need to provide this Word document twice, so we listed it twice in our presentation, is my guess. And David, jump in at any point if needed. So David mentioned there's a couple tier level evaluations. Tier 1 evaluation from DCJS is really pass fail. Did you provide everything that was requested? This is not something like, I don't know, I'll skip it. Okay, then you're not eligible anymore and you won't be awarded the grant. All right, you need to be in by the deadline, May 17th, that your organization is eligible, right? We shared that criteria with you. You're pre-qualified. You have to be pre-qualified. If you were pre-qualified in Grants Gateway, David mentioned this, before the transition, it should have transitioned to the new system. However, if you were not pre-qualified or you were expired, you're starting from scratch. That was the previous part where we talked about pre-qualification. You need to answer all the questions of the RFA, both in GMS, right? That's the grant management system online, and in a Word document that you paste into GMS. Still with me? All right. After that, you need to provide your budget detail. What are the projects you plan to upgrade, you plan to harden? And that needs to go in your application, as well as the work plan. A lot of this stuff, the work plan, the project, budget detail, there's paperwork, there's forms that you can use that's part of the RFA. If you have looked through the RFA, it's not new to you what I'm saying.
The RFA has appendices.
Yep.
And all they want you to do is to copy that information, and they tell you, fill in the name and address of your organization and use this language. But again, if you haven't done that, you don't have a complete application. Do it.
Exactly. So don't be too afraid. A lot of this material is ready for you. You just need to make it personal for you. So what else is required, right? Two systems, pre-qual and GMS, and you must have an assessment for every facility that you'll harden, right? We said an organization can get up to $200,000, but it seems like the language of the grant that you can break up that $200,000 amongst different facilities of your entity, right? But if you have two buildings, you'll need to get two assessments. And then somehow you definitely obviously need to attach the assessment, and then within the application, specify where that installation is happening. If you're doing cybersecurity, and you should, you also need a cybersecurity self-assessment that Jeremy is available for if you get to him before 200 requests come in. You also need to do, and this is a little simpler, they require a photo of the facility to showing what you're doing, which is the building that you are, so that the building does exist, and that when they go back, they can refer to the picture you provided that you're installing on the building that you requested for. The next section, we kind of go through all the RFP questions that you'll see if you read through the RFA. I don't know if we'll have enough time to get through it all today, but we can get started. Again, this is all in the RFA and on GMS, where you need to submit your answers to as well, right? So it's pretty straightforward. And some of these things, there's no points. You just need to specify who you are, and most importantly, describe your organization's risk of a hate crime. So describing your organization's risk of a hate crime, there's some standard language out there you could use, language that we have provided. Maybe you find it, maybe it's in your assessment, maybe you find it on our website, maybe someone else wants to narrate something for your organization. And as well, there's, what else can you include to further prove your case? Are you landmarked, prominent leaders, etc.? Obviously, if you're in the New York City area or maybe other counties, you can get from your local law enforcement, you can get actual hate crimes data. The actual assessment is scored in how you answer your questions based on your assessment, right? That it clearly identifies the threats to your facility, clearly identifies the vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities are, okay, there's a threat, someone wants to attack you, how would they actually do it? And then describe how those vulnerabilities are linked together. And apologies, we're not going through every word. We want to get through some of these slides before we have to go to questions. And right? Other things that can further impact your threat, your history, your location. Maybe it's a very concentrated area, so multiple targets, or vice versa. Maybe it's the standalone organization that gets all the attention. And then there's also, be aware, there are questions, right? We said don't ever leave anything blank. There are questions where you have to fill out NA, not applicable, for questions 10A and 10B, basically because they will submit based on your organization's address and location the responses to those questions. Again, once we post this, you'll have a little bit more of the language. If we continue with the second session, especially once we get the answers from DCJS on our CSI, we have questions as well. We've gotten some good questions from the community based on the RFA. That's either vague or gray. And DCJS, fortunately, will answer those questions. Last year they did, and like you saw, they'll toward end of February they'll take questions and we'll get some answers. David, I think we should turn to Q&A. There's a lot. I don't know if we'll get through the rest of the slides. Again, we'll post this as we tweak it and as we get some more answers from DCJS. But again, the questions are based on, if you look at what we've provided, it's literally from the RFA. All right, so we'll stop here. If there's any RSDs who want to jump in as we answer some questions, feel free. But there's a lot, and we want to get through them, even though some may be reiterations, but that could be valuable to many. I'll start with the first one. David, feel free to jump in as your voice allows. Jeremy, if we get to cyber, RSDs, if you see something specific that you've seen the question.
First of all, I did post in the chat box the address to request either a physical or a cybersecurity assessment. So that covered a lot of the questions. How do we get Jeremy? Jeremy, you're a man in demand.
At last to finally be wanted.
You just click to the link, you fill it out. Jamie, our Chief Administrative Officer, is terrific. She'll get back to you. For those of you who aren't in our system, we're going to need a little bit of, we need people to sign agreements with us and to provide some sort of insurance documentation. Jamie will take care of all of that for everybody. So just click on the link and that'll get this process started. And the sooner you're in, the better, because even though we're going out and we're hiring extra people to do physical assessments, we run out of capacity because everyone, in the last month, we're just fully booked.
Exactly. No, thank you, David. And anyone who's on this webinar at this point, we hope you're familiar with the Community Security Initiative. If you don't see the link in the chat, CSI-NY.org, you'll look for service requests. But like David said, there's some requirements that we'll need from you if you haven't worked with us before. A, again, it is free. And B, it's first come, first serve. And if we get overwhelmed, whether for cyber or our regular terrorism vulnerability assessments, we might not be able to get to you in time.
I just want to interject something with regard to the cybersecurity assessments. Last year, when we went through this cycle, a great many people requested assessments, but never bothered to give us the information. We have created a form that clearly indicates the information that we have to have in order to do your assessments. When things got hairy last year, there were a lot of assessments I simply couldn't get to because nobody had provided the information. Now, we do our best, but if you can't give us the information, there's not a whole lot we can do. Please fill out the form.
Well said. As a free, high-quality resource, we try to do as much as we can, but there is something that we need from you. And most of our regional team, as well as Jeremy, need to collect some of the initial information before they come out. And again, like Jeremy said, if we don't have that, we can't move forward. Questions will only be taken in the chat. We'll try to get through as many as that are there that we didn't talk about yet in the actual webinar. The first one, is there a waiting period between receiving a grant and applying for a new grant? If so, is it from the time of the grant application or the time of work being completed? There's no issue if you've had a previous grant. Applying for another grant, you just can't apply for the same projects.
Just on that point, for example, if you received a grant, either a hate crimes grant or a federal NSGP grant. For example, to upgrade your CCTV system. And it's now 5 years later, and it's time to update your equipment. Your assessment should say you need updated equipment. And you just submit that kind of information that we're updating. Again, if they paid for CCTV equipment, you're adding to the system. Well, we didn't have CCTV at this door and we're adding one. That's fine. You just make it clear that you're not asking for the same thing. You're asking for something new.
Yeah, and before we jump further, just to reiterate, we don't speak for the state. You know, it's again from reading the RFA, from being familiar with these grants and the processes. Any official questions definitely refer to the RFA or the agencies administering the grant. We are awarded a grant last year, but have not completed the project and submitted for reimbursement. If the funds from last year were transferred to this year, is that an issue? I think you're confusing something we mentioned prior. It's not funds that were awarded. There were some funds that were never allocated to any organization that might be able to supplement this year's award, so don't worry about that. Does applying to this year at multiple sites mean multiple assessments? 100%. Any site getting an assessment, you're trying to do upgrades at, using these funds for, you need an assessment for that site. Please recognize, if you're going to be using us for, especially if you're multi-site, we can't do more than one site for you at a time. So it could be a month or two. If we do one site and there's already a lot of assessment requests in our queue, every region, that if you request your first site, we'll get that one completed and then reschedule your next. You might not get them all done by us in time. You might need to look for other avenues to get assessment.
They do have a self-assessment form.
Right. There is definitely a self-assessment form, which is perfectly kosher. And, you'll see the RFA, it references it. It just might leave some vulnerabilities without having an expert look at it, but definitely an option, especially if you have multiple sites. Are you eligible when you don't have your own physical location instead rent? Yeah, renting is fine. Leasing, renting, but it has to be a physical space. And you obviously need to coordinate with the landlord to do the upgrades that you want to do.
More than coordinate, you need permission from the landlord, according to the grant.
Exactly, right. They take the onus off of themselves and put it on you, right? You can be a renter, that's fine, but you need to coordinate, you need to get the approval from the landlord.
You can't tell the landlord New York State ordered you to do this.
Exactly. So we only need to do one application, can ask for 200,000 in one application, correct? That is exactly the difference here. It is one application, max 200K, includes cyber, which we advise you request, but can be for multiple sites. Do again, total 200 grand amongst your multiple sites. And I think that's the next question. Even to be clear, we have two separate sites. We get 200,000 total. Exactly, you can only get 200,000 max. In the previous hate crimes grant iteration, what they did to break it up among sites was you could do 50 grand here, 50 grand there, because they're separate applications. Now it's one application, but you can include different addresses. Again, if you have assessments for all of them. If you're pre-qualified, okay, this is for David, but I think he actually addressed this. If you're pre-qualified in Grants Gateway, at the time of the transition to SFS, are we automatically pre-qualified in SFS, or do we have to re-qualify? Pre-qualify. According to Grants Gateway,
qualified, but don't trust verify.
Exactly. I wouldn't wait on it, especially because you need to pull up documentation, so you'll need to get into your SFS account. Technically, with the system transition, if you were pre-qualified in Grants Gateway at the time of transition, you were pre-qualified in SFS. If anything was expired, then it was not transferred and you need to start from scratch.
At the beginning of January, everyone who was transferred received a letter with instructions on how to sign into an email with instructions on how to sign into SFS. All you have to do is follow the directions in that letter and you get right in. People have done that.
If you've never received the letter or you're just unsure, we provide links in this webinar or on our website. You can go there right now with links, how to find your SFS, who to contact. So if they haven't reached out to you, take that effort, take that step to like David said, verify your own situation. Fell always with the hardest questions. How would applying for multiple sites work? Separate assessment, separate application. Definitely you need separate assessments. That is clear in the RFA. And obviously you attach those in GMS. A question that I personally have and will be asking of DCJS is how within your GMS application do you specify those different addresses? So that I do not know the answer to. I believe we'll do a session 2 of today, especially because we didn't get through budget slides. It'll be provided once we post this to the website, but we didn't go through it in today's session. But we obviously will have follow-up questions and a follow-up session based on DCJS answers to the few unknowns. Can we apply for only cybersecurity and training, or do we need to apply for physical hardening? 100%. You can apply for $200,000 of cybersecurity. I don't know if there's a limit on training, but it seems like you can also, it's a lot of training, but training is important. So, you know, definitely, and you don't have to apply for the whole 200 either. So you're not required to apply for physical upgrades.
One of the things that CSI does do is training at no cost. So, you know, it's a way to stretch your budget by having us do the training.
Exactly. Now, each of you have probably worked with your regional security director if you're in our area of responsibility, New York City, downstate region, surrounding counties, and a little north of the city as we're spreading upstate. But again, our regional security directors all do training. And again, if you're trying to figure out how to maximize your budget, definitely that's one of the things we do, whether grant season or not, provide free, high quality training.
We're all certified in, you know, active shooter, similar things. Ethan is certified in Stop the Bleed. He's a paramedic. We're out there doing high quality training. It's probably a good idea, even if you have a security card company that said, we'll do all this for you. It's good to bring us in because another pair of eyes is always helpful. So even if they're doing their own drills, you know, active shooter drills or other kinds of drills, we suggest that you bring in our regional security directors and, you know, they'll help. And they will have great ideas. I've seen it happen.
Let's continue. I hope everyone's keeping up with the New York speed. I do everything at ×2 speed audio, so I'll try to slow it down a bit. Rafal likes to keep me on my toes. What about two entities occupying the same location? Are they each allowed to apply for their own, or is it one application per site regardless of how many nonprofits reside there? It's a good question because the federal grant clearly does not allow for different entities within one organization. Think of Manhattan building. You cannot. If you have the same address, one entity. This state hate crimes grant, we are not sure. This is one of our follow-up questions. Rafal, I'd say you should write back to the question opportunity as well, and hopefully they give us a clear answer there. In general, DCJS seems more flexible, but again, we can't answer that till we know from them. Could you provide a sheet of suggested cybersecurity upgrades? It's a perfect question. Assessments, and actually, Jeremy has some other tricks up his sleeve in terms of purchase guidance, our newsletters. So take advantage. He's going to be a busy man for a few months. It doesn't have to be grant season to request cybersecurity assessments, so please always feel free. Do security assessments need to be performed by an external expert, or can we do our own self-assessment? 100%. You can do your own self-assessment. There actually is a form included with this RFA for self-assessments. There's no reason why you cannot. I don't think they provide a template for the cyber. And again, you know, it can definitely get you eligible for the grant.
They describe what they want to see.
Right. But just remember, the agencies are very strict. If you miss something, then you can't request that as the project you want to do. We've seen that happen. So it's important to work with professionals.
One other thing, and this is a consideration, and we have no special insight. We just have a lot of experience. There's going to be a lot of state money available. People ask, you know, should we apply for the state or should we apply for the federal grant? And should we list items A, B, and C on one and D, E, and F on the other? I lean toward requesting your most important items on each. So, and if you win both grants and you're lucky enough to win both grants, what you can do is go to the state, which doesn't have to ask the feds for permission, go to the state and say, we want to shift items A, B, and C to D, E, and F that were on our vulnerability assessment. It's very clear we're there. The feds will also let you shift items, but they must be on the vulnerability assessment. They won't let you come up with a new item.
What David's saying is, if you go for both grants, hoping for priority projects, there are mechanisms to adjust your funding requests if you get one, if you get both, so that they're not overlapping. And that has happened with many projects that we've coached where funds needed to be shifted. So it's definitely an option for you. All right, let's continue. Can funds be used for cybersecurity in locations outside New York State for orgs that are based in New York but have remote staff around the country? That is a great question. And that's the reality, right, of cyber systems, right? What if the CEO is traveling? They're not in New York. That's probably going to have to be answered by DCJS. I think the reality is if your headquarters is New York and the physical pieces you buy, let's say you get a physical firewall and computers, I don't think you can buy computers and hardware outside, but a network that's based out of New York should be okay. Again, that's a good question, Dave. Please note it.
That's the norm, as
it's how the world works.
Jeremy alluded to when he was talking before, putting things in the cloud. Essentially, clouds don't live in New York. These racks of servers are out in Montana somewhere. They have another group that's out, somewhere out west.
The equipment and services are still servicing an organization resident in New York State. I mean, honestly, if we started limiting ourselves only to software and equipment and whatever that was manufactured in New York State, there'd be very little we could buy. So I wouldn't really get too hot under the collar. You are providing a service. The service is contracted for an organization in New York State. That's a very arguable point.
All right, this is a David question. I know we addressed it a little bit talking about eligibility for the grant. Do we need to be legally a 501c3 or 501c3 eligible?
You have to be a 501c3. Synagogues are automatically 501c3s. So what you need to do is submit your articles of incorporation. You must be incorporated for this grant. That will reflect your religious corporation. That is sufficiently kosher. And then what you do is you write the letter and put the letter in that empty box so that there are no empty boxes.
We own a campus that is now rented. We will occupy the space after June 30th, 2024. Is this building eligible for the grant? So the space is occupied, which is required, but it sounds like the renter's leaving. That's a unique question. That would definitely need to be a DCJS answer.
Consider May 17th a snapshot. Your application has to be accurate as of the time of submission.
What if we didn't receive an email to update an SFS, but we're pre-qualified in Grants Gateway? Yeah, we said many times, take a little bit of initiative here. Go to our website, go to Grants Management, pre-qual, whatever those websites are, and ask, reach out, figure out your status. We don't want to wait on them. As much as we've heard, they did email people. I personally got an email from whatever systems I may have been logged in, had an account with. But if you didn't, there could be some other questions. So I definitely say do your homework, figure out your status. Don't rely or wait on these agencies which are muddling through and figuring it out. Does DCJS require proof of pre-qualification? 100%, 100%. You need to submit a screenshot stating you're pre-qualified in your GMS application. And of course, they can cross-reference it. If you plan to narrate your own or make your own document, they will look that you're pre-qualified in the SFS system. All right, we have a question about areas outside of the New York City area. There are other resources if you're outside of New York. Obviously, this grant is only for New York State that we're talking about today.
Saratoga's coming into our purview. We've already served the synagogue in Saratoga.
Beautiful. So
We haven't done an assessment there, but we've helped them out.
We have a regional security director who's picking up the Hudson region, almost up to Albany. Pat Regan, I would say reach out to our CSI questions email, see if you are in our catchment area, and if not, we'll connect you with our partners to make sure you do get supported. Regarding reimbursement and purchasing timelines, do you need to hold off on purchasing anything, including the project, until after the contract start date? This may be the most important question yet. Yes. You are not eligible for projects that are bought before you are awarded the contract. Technically, even your contract's executed. So you may receive an email in August saying you were awarded, your contract starts in September, and then it takes you time to get executed, meaning signing on the contract, agreeing. Technically, you might not be eligible for anything, depending on how DCJS does it, until your contract is executed. So if you're doing something today, it is not eligible. It is during this contract period. It is items that you have purchased and followed the procurement process during the grant period. So 100%, you will not be reimbursed for anything prior. So an application can include both cyber and physical equipment. No separate application for cyber this year. Correct. It is one application, whether it's multiple sites and a cyber. You just need an assessment for each component that you do included with your application. Right, and I see Mitch, our executive director, answered that with how do we do our assessments? You know, especially when it gets very busy and all our regional team are swamped and having a lot of requests. Some things can be done virtual, and if we can get there in person, we will, of course, try to do that. What's that?
For the most part. The
cyber's often
virtual.
So we get Jeremy the cyber vehicle so he can get everywhere. If you have a self-assessment, is a self-assessment required even if you have a professional TVA? The language in the RFA makes it seem like that as long as you have an assessment done within 3 years, that will suffice. It doesn't have to be the self-assessment, but the self-assessment provided by DCJS does suffice. Okay, so David answered that one. Is the photo required even if you're only applying for cyber and training support? I hear your logic there, but it's a requirement. It's not the hardest thing to do. I would just take that picture. Is the new assessment the one-page assessment that they have provided? Right, they provide a self-assessment document. You can use that. It obviously won't be comprehensive. A good assessment will help you whether or not you do these grants to understand where you should do your upgrades and where you should focus. If Jeremy wants to post his email in the chat, please do so. But the reality is to request an assessment, you need to go to our service requests online. And so if you email him, that's what he'll send you. It's not a direct email request. We have a service tracker because we help literally hundreds of organizations, assessments, training.
Yeah, let me interject here. We have these systems set up for very good reasons, not the least of which is to salve my sanity. So follow the procedures, get on the website, request an assessment, and it will proceed from there. There's a reason why I don't put my phone on my signature block. It's about maintaining, you know, an orderly way of doing things. It's not designed to make me remote.
Exactly. Well, you know, as Bill opened up, you know, we're growing, our services are growing, and we have a process to ensure that we do respond to you and that we have the documents we need from any organization looking for our services. But obviously, every one of our team is always responsive nonetheless. But for official services like an assessment, like a training, please go through our service requests.
There was a question on DUNS numbers. DUNS numbers are not necessary anywhere anymore.
Right. Thank you, David. I was hoping to not get into that one.
What is weirdly called the New York State vendor number. Remember that in a lot of things that you look at SFS, you're a vendor. The state believes you're trying to sell them something. You're not, but you know, leave them to their fantasy. You know, you need to know your New York State vendor number, which will be sitting there in SFS.
let's reiterate that point for the 70 or so who are sticking through this Q&A, that, and this is one of David's favorite finds as he navigated the new SFS pre-qualification system. You, the entity applying, are the vendor. So just recognize that when you see that language vendor in your SFS, it's you. I know the grant can't continue on a previous grant, but what about something that was approved on a previous grant, but we ran out of funds? Well, it's a great question. It seems very much that this award this year can be used to continue projects that you didn't have enough funds for. It can't be to redo it necessarily or enhance the actual item itself, like a fence, but if you need to continue fencing, it seems like that can be used. If we have multiple sites, should we submit one application for the total amount or one application for each site? Thank you. All right, we talked about this several times already. It's one application per organization, up to 200,000 max, and you need to have an assessment for each site, including cyber if you're applying for cyber. Then you attach all these assessments into your GMS. But a question that remains from our team that we will ask of DCJS is, how in your GMS application do you specify the different addresses? So
we'll ask them how to do budget forms for this kind of
exactly.
issue.
DCJS is still learning. We're coaching, we're partnering with them, but it's still a great opportunity that everyone should take advantage of. If multiple sites were assessed in the same vulnerability assessment, would that be sufficient, or is a separate assessment for each site required? Right, if you have a campus with multiple buildings, maybe you hired an organization that did all that in one. There's ways that can work professionally, but this grant makes it seem clear you need a separate assessment. So I would keep it safe and provide an assessment per location. The DCJS people and the NSGP people do not confer with each other over reviewing applications, right? Correct. Two different worlds. Similar contracts, because you're contracting with New York State for both programs, the federal grant through the state and this state grant, but they do not work with each other. And not only that, for those of you who have been through the grant cycles, have different translations and definitions of some of the procurement guidance. We love the extra fun. All right, this is definitely a question for David. For a religious school, is an approved charter acceptable as articles of incorporation, or are they two different things?
Schools have to be incorporated too as an educational institution, so you should have that. But that's a very specific question. If you only have your charter, try putting the charter there and see if it's accepted. If not, we'll have to ask Val.
Our secret weapon. All right, the text of this year's RFA does not mention the need for pre-qualification screenshot like last year's. Is this an oversight, or will they be reviewing SFS results themselves somehow? Well, 100% they're going to verify with SFS. You know, anyone can modify a document, a screenshot. So it's really just to make sure that you are actually pre-qualified. So if they don't require it, then you're not required to do that screenshot, but they will 100%.
Right, I didn't see it in the RFA. And it could be they have a way to automatically verify it.
Yeah, it's one of the core eligibility requirements. So don't get too wrapped up on whether the screenshot's allowed. Focus on, are you pre-qualified or not? Right. So people are having some issues with SFS. We all are. They're a little bit slow to respond. They're learning it themselves. It's a new transition. You know, David spent decade plus teaching and coaching Grants Gateway. And then to make the grant extra fun for everyone, they decided to transition that system. So we're taking bets on what next year's big curveball will be. But for this year, we're all navigating SFS. Be patient, be consistent, check your own, statuses, get into the system. And that's the move on SFS. How long does it take to get reimbursed? So the state is required by state law to reimburse if your documentation and everything is accurate within 30 days. And they have stuck to that. That is the one thing they do quickly and consistently. However, if your reimbursement paperwork and the way you follow procurement was accurate, But yeah, for the most part, at that point, you'll be a year and a half into your grant period, right? So that's another thing to recognize. If you're looking for upgrades this summer, it's not going to be from this grant. Probably, maybe next summer if you're really good, but potentially even the second summer after that is when you would have your projects completed, just to give you some perspective of following the rules. But once you finish them and you submit your invoices, they're usually very good at submitting your reimbursement in 30 days. We're getting towards the end here. This is a David Pollock question. What attachments are required to attach with application? Vendor responsibility questionnaire.
They don't have it there, but it's a question that I have on my list to ask. They do say you have to get it, it must be approved and submitted before the application, but they don't say it's one of the attachments.
Thank you, David.
Remember, we're answering questions before, we've gotten clarity from the agency because they don't know. And some of it is they just forgot to anticipate these questions.
And you're also can ask DCJS directly, and we advise you do so. Recognize, again, we don't speak for the state. This is just from our experience and best practice and understanding. Our goal is for good, improved, goal-focused security upgrades, and these grants are a great way to get there. So we want to help you navigate. If we didn't address your question today, please feel free to email CSI questions, CSI_questions, actually, at CSI-NY.org, or your regional security director. Again, that's on the website, everyone's contact. And, we'll be doing more sessions. Stay tuned. Next week, we'll probably not next week, in 2 weeks, Consultants Corner will go back to procurement-related material. And then once we have the answers again on these questions for DCJS, we'll do a follow-up session. We'll get into the budget area of your application for the hate crimes grant. And we'll do a follow-up session before these grants are due in May. It seems like a lot of time. If you're new to it, I would get started, especially with some of the hurdles from the agencies. With that, I want to thank the whole team. There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes.
Before you sign off, because there was something that you moved on before I got a chance to jump in. On the question of reimbursements, one thing that I want to point out is that for organizations in New York City and Long Island, the Hebrew Free Loan Society does have a security infrastructure loan. So any Jewish organization that has a grant, since these are reimbursement grants, the Hebrew Free Loan Society will arrange a loan for you to cover the cost of acquiring the equipment. And hopefully you immediately submit all the paperwork to get reimbursed. And once you're reimbursed, you reimburse Hebrew Free Loan so they can use the money for other organizations. All of this information is on the CSI-NY.org website. There's a green sidebar on the left. And if you scroll down, it shows you we have dedicated pages for security grants, pre-qualifications, and information links to the Hebrew Free Loan Society and other things so that people can get more information. Sorry, Dov.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Again, a lot of information on our website. I'd read the RFA for yourself. It's not as bad as it seems. And it's one of those things, don't try to drink up everything at one shot, navigate through step by step. And, we're here to support as well. So if you don't know your RSD, please also check on our website. All right. Thank you, everybody. Good luck, and we'll be back in a few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.